Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a story that's equal parts fascinating and, well, a little bit ridiculous.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah,
A story about a giant.
you got it, a Cardiff giant.
One of the most famous hoaxes in American history.
Precisely. We'll be exploring an excerpt from the History Daily podcast to unpack this whole saga.
Sounds fun.
So for those who might not be familiar, imagine this. It's 1869, upstate New York, and a group of laborers stumbles upon a 10-foot-tall, petrified giant buried on a farm.
Oh, I can already see where this is going.
Right. It sounds like something straight out of a, well, tall tale.
It really does.
But the story captivated the nation, sparking debates about biblical giants, evolution, and, of course, the very nature of truth itself.
It's amazing how this one hoax managed to tap into so many cultural anxieties of the time.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unearth the truth behind this audacious scheme. Who were the masterminds behind it?
And how did they manage to fool so many people?
Exactly. And what can this story tell us about our own susceptibility to misinformation and spectacle?
It's a story that still resonates today in a world where truth and fiction often blur.
Couldn't agree more. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind the clock back to the 1860s, a time of immense change and upheaval in America.
A time when traditional beliefs were being challenged by new scientific discoveries. Darwin's theory of evolution, for example, was causing quite a stir.
It was a real clash of worldviews.
Definitely. So picture this. The nation is still reeling from the Civil War, and there's this growing tension between those clinging to traditional religious beliefs and those embracing a more scientific view of the world.
A real cultural tug of war.
And into this already charged atmosphere comes the Cardiff giant, the supposed biblical relic that seemed to offer concrete proof of a literal interpretation of the Bible.
It was like throwing gasoline on an already smoldering fire.
Exactly. People were hungry for answers, for something to confirm their beliefs. And here, seemingly out of the earth, comes this giant.
A 10-foot-tall testament to the stories they had always been told.
It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
Almost like it was, well, planned that way.
Well, it was.
Of course it was.
Enter George Hull, the mastermind behind the Cardiff giant hoax.
All right, let's talk about this guy. Who was George Hull, and what possessed him to cook up such an elaborate scheme?
Well, from what we know, Hull was a tobacco merchant, a bit of a skeptic, and let's just say, not exactly a fan of organized religion.
He sounds like my kind of guy.
In fact, the idea for the giant was sparked by a heated argument he had with a Methodist preacher.
Oh, really? What were they arguing about?
Well, the preacher was a staunch believer in the literal truth of the Bible, including the stories of giants roaming the earth. Hull, being a man of science and reason, found this whole notion to be a bit ridiculous.
So he decided to prove a point.
It's one way to put it.
I love it.
He wanted to expose what he saw as the blind faith of those who accepted these biblical stories without question.
So what did he do? Did he just carve a giant out of wood and bury it in his backyard?
Oh no, this was much more sophisticated than that. Hull was committed to creating a truly convincing illusion.
He wanted to make people believe they were looking at an actual petrified giant?
Exactly, and that required some serious planning and ingenuity. He started by procuring a massive block of gypsum, all 11 tons of it, from a quarry in Iowa.
Wait, gypsum? Why gypsum?
It was a clever choice.
Yeah.
Gypsum is a relatively soft mineral that hardens over time, giving it that ancient, petrified look that Hull was going for.
Mm-hmm. So it would appear to be a genuine fossil.
Exactly.
And it's also a lot easier to carve than, say, granite.
You got it.
Okay, so he's got his giant block of gypsum. What did he do next? Did he rent a U-Haul and drive it to New York?
Not quite. He had it shipped secretly by train to his cousin William Newell's farm in upstate New York.
Sneaky. So the cousin was in on the hoax from the start.
Oh, absolutely. Newell was a key player in this whole scheme.
I bet. They must have had some interesting late-night conversations planning this out. Okay, so the gypsum arrives at the farm. What happens next?
Well, they couldn't just leave this giant block of gypsum lying around. They needed to make it look like it had been buried for centuries.
So they buried it.
They did. They dug a massive pit and carefully lowered the gypsum block into it. And then, to really sell the illusion, they treated the giant's surface with acids.
Acids? Why acids?
To make it appear weathered and aged.
They really thought of everything. Okay, so the giant is buried. Now, how do you go about discovering a 10-foot-tall stone man?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
I'm all ears.
Remember, Hull wasn't just trying to create a giant, he was trying to create a spectacle.
He wanted to make a splash.
Exactly. And what better way to do that than to stage a dramatic discovery?
Okay, so how do they pull that off?
Well, they hired a group of laborers to dig a well on Newell's farm.
Ah, I see where this is going. A well-timed discovery.
Precisely. The laborers, who were, of course, in on the scheme, struck the buried giant while digging.
And let out a perfectly timed gasp of astonishment.
Oh, I'm sure there were some dramatic pronouncements about finding a biblical giant,
Hmm.
and maybe even a few fainted farmhands for good measure.
Now you're getting it. This was 19th century viral marketing at its finest.
Absolutely.
No internet, no social media, just good old-fashioned word of mouth and some carefully placed newspaper articles.
And it worked. Word of the giant spread like wildfire, drawing crowds from all over the state and beyond.
I can only imagine the scene. Farmers, shopkeepers, clergymen all flocking to this remote farm to gawk at this supposed biblical relic.
It must have been quite a sight.
And I bet Newell was loving every minute of it. He had turned his farm into a bona fide tourist attraction.
Oh, he wasted no time capitalizing on the
Yeah.
discovery. He started charging admission to see the giant.
Genius. And people were paying?
They were. People were eager to see this marvel with their own eyes. It was like a 19th century version of a blockbuster movie.
I wonder what Hull was thinking at this point. Did he ever imagine his prank would spiral into such a massive phenomenon?
It's hard to say, but I bet he was having a good chuckle at the whole thing.
So, the Giant's a hit, crowds are growing, money's rolling in, and it seems like everyone's buying into the hype. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, enter P.T. Barnum, the ultimate showman.
Oh boy, here comes trouble.
Barnum was a master of spectacle and entertainment, and he saw the Cardiff Giant not just as a curiosity, but as a golden ticket to even greater fame and fortune.
And of course, Barnum being Barnum, he wouldn't just sit back and watch someone else rake in all the cash.
You know Barnum, he had to get in on the action.
Did he try to buy the Giant from Newell?
He did,
And?
and was promptly rebuffed. Newell and his partners knew they had a good thing going, and they weren't about to let Barnum steal their thunder.
So what did Barnum do?
Well, he did what any savvy entrepreneur of the time would do. He created his own version of the Cardiff Giant.
Wait, a copy of a fake?
Yep.
That's bold.
Barnum knew that having the original wasn't as important as having a good story. He put his replica on display in New York City, claiming his giant was the real deal.
Unbelievable. Did people actually buy it?
Well, let's just say Barnum knew how to spin a yarn.
And people were eager to be entertained.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got two giants, both fake, raking in cash, and the public seemingly none the wiser.
It's a classic tale of American humbuggery.
But how long could the charade last?
Well, that's a story for another time.
All right, so we left off with two fake giants duking it out for the title of most believable.
Two entrepreneurs, each claiming to possess the real petrified giant.
And the public, eager to be amazed, lapping it all up. What a story. But surely at some point, the truth had to come out right.
It did, but it didn't happen quite the way you might expect.
Do tell.
Well, as you can imagine, the more popular these giants became, the more attention they attracted, and not all of it was positive.
Skeptics started to emerge.
Absolutely. Scientists, scholars, and even some clergymen began raising doubts about the authenticity of these supposed petrified men.
Okay, so the cracks were starting to show. What were some of the red flags people were picking up on?
Well, for one thing, the giant's anatomy wasn't quite right. There were inconsistencies in their proportions, details that a skilled anatomist would have immediately recognized as, shall we say, a bit off.
So even in their fakery, they weren't quite anatomically correct.
Right, and then there was the issue of the lack of any real archaeological context. No other fossils or artifacts were found alongside the giants, which was highly unusual for a discovery of this supposed age and significance.
So it was like these giants just popped out of nowhere.
Pretty much.
And I'm guessing the tool marks on the giants didn't help their case either.
You got it. As scientists examined the giants more closely, they discovered clear evidence of recent carving. Using magnifying glasses and even early forms of photography, they could see the telltale marks of chisels and other tools.
Oops. Looks like Hull and Barnum weren't as meticulous in their craftsmanship as they thought.
No, they weren't.
So with all this evidence piling up, what happened? Was there a grand expose? A public shaming?
Well, the whole thing eventually culminated in a legal battle between Barnum and the owners of the original giant, each claiming to have the real one.
Of course, money and ego, a classic recipe for a legal showdown.
Absolutely. And amidst all this legal wrangling, more and more experts weighed in, presenting their findings and further debunking the giant's authenticity.
So the hoax unraveled in a courtroom drama. Did Hull and Barnum try to maintain their charade?
Barnum, being the consummate showman, never actually admitted that his giant was a fake. He continued to milk it for all it was worth, playing up the controversy and using it to draw even bigger crowds.
Classic Barnum. Never let a good controversy go to waste. But what about Hull? Did he ever confess to his role in the scheme?
He did. Perhaps sensing that the jig was up, or maybe just enjoying the attention, Hull eventually came clean.
So he admitted to everything: the gypsum, the carving, the elaborate burial.
The whole 9 yards. He even revealed his motivations for creating the hoax, explaining that he wanted to expose the gullibility of those who blindly accepted biblical literalism.
So, in a way, he achieved his goal. He sparked a national conversation about faith, science, and the importance of critical thinking.
You could say that, but the story doesn't end there.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yes. What's truly remarkable is what happened next.
Wait, you're telling me that even after being exposed as a complete fabrication, the Cardiff giant remained popular?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's as if the public, having been so thoroughly tricked, decided to simply embrace the absurdity of it all.
So instead of feeling cheated or outraged, people just laughed it off.
More or less. The Cardiff giant became a kind of cultural icon, a symbol of American ingenuity and the power of a good story, even if that story was completely made up.
It's like they decided to celebrate the hoax itself, the audacity of it all.
Exactly. And that, I think, is what makes this story of the Cardiff giant so enduring. It's a reminder that we humans have a complex relationship with truth. We crave it, we seek it out, but we also have a knack for being captivated by a good yarn, even if we know it's not entirely true.
So in a way, the Cardiff giant, this colossal fake, reveals something very real about human nature, our capacity for both critical thinking and for suspending disbelief.
You got it. It's a fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
And it also raises some interesting questions about the role of entertainment and spectacle in shaping our understanding of the world.
Especially in a time when information, both true and false, spreads at lightning speed.
Exactly. But that's a conversation for another time.
For now, let's just revel in the absurdity of it all. A 10-foot-tall stone man, a scheming tobacco merchant, a savvy showman, and a public eager to be amazed. It's a story that never gets old. But the story of the Cardiff giant doesn't end there. Remember George Hull, the mastermind behind it all? Well, it seems he wasn't content with just one hoax.
Oh no, not an inner giant.
Well, not exactly a giant, but something equally outlandish. And this time, he decided to tap into one of the most controversial scientific debates of his time: the theory of evolution.
Intriguing. I can't wait to hear what he cooked up next.
Okay, so Hull's feeling pretty smug after the success of the Cardiff giant, even with the hoax being exposed.
And he's got this, let's call it a unique perspective on religion and science.
So he decides to double down. What was his next move?
He sets his sights on an even bigger target: Darwin's theory of evolution.
Ah, so this is where the solid Muldoon comes in, right? The supposed missing link between humans and apes.
You got it. Hull was a master at exploiting cultural anxieties, and the idea of humans descending from primates was still deeply unsettling to many in the late 19th century.
I bet. It was a time of tremendous scientific upheaval. Darwin's ideas were challenging long-held beliefs about the natural world and humanity's place in it.
Exactly. And Hull, being the provocateur that he was, saw an opportunity to tap into that controversy. He decided to create a missing link of his own, a creature that would blur the lines between humans and apes and, in his mind, expose the absurdity of evolutionary theory.
I can already see the headlines. Petrified missing link found. Darwin proved right or wrong.
Oh, I'm sure the newspapers had a field day with it.
So tell me more about this solid Muldoon. What did it look like? Where did Hull find it?
Well, like the Cardiff giant, the solid Muldoon was crafted from gypsum. But this time, Hull decided to get even more creative.
Okay, so he's got his gypsum. What did he do? Did he give it fur, make it growl?
He gave it a tail, a long, prominent tail.
A tail. Okay, that's a choice. I guess he really wanted to drive home the point that humans were related to monkeys.
You got it. The tail was the piece de resistance, the detail that was sure to spark debate and controversy.
So where did he claim to have unearthed this tailed wonder?
This time, he concocted a story about finding it in a mine in Colorado. He even went so far as to fabricate expert testimonials from supposed geologists and paleontologists to lend credence to his claims.
So he was really going all in on this hoax. Did he try to exhibit the solid Muldoon like he did with the Cardiff giant?
He did. He took the Muldoon on tour, hoping to capitalize on his previous success and stir up even more controversy.
I can only imagine the reactions. Did people buy it? Did he manage to fool anyone this time around?
Not quite. You see, after the Cardiff Giant debacle, Hull's reputation had taken a hit.
Yeah, I'd say so.
People were much more skeptical, and the scientific community was on high alert.
They weren't going to fall for the same trick twice.
Right. When news of the solid Muldoon spread, scientists were quick to point out its flaws.
Like what?
They noted anatomical inconsistencies, the lack of any real fossil evidence to support its existence, and, of course, the rather conspicuous tail, which didn't fit with any known evolutionary lineage.
So basically, the solid Muldoon was a bit of an anatomical mess.
You could say that. It was clear to anyone with a trained eye that it was a fake.
So the hoax failed.
It did. Hull's attempt to exploit the controversy surrounding evolution backfired. The solid Muldoon was quickly debunked and faded into obscurity.
And what about Hull himself? Did he just slink away, defeated and disgraced?
Well, we don't know for sure what happened to the solid Muldoon. It vanished from the historical record, perhaps destroyed by Hull himself, or maybe tucked away in some forgotten attic, waiting to be rediscovered.
A lost relic of a failed hoax. It's almost fitting, isn't it?
In a way, yes. The solid Muldoon, in its failure, serves as a reminder that even the most elaborate hoaxes eventually crumble under the weight of scrutiny and evidence.
It's a testament to the power of critical thinking and the importance of questioning what we see and hear, even when it comes from seemingly authoritative sources.
Exactly.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the curious case of the Cardiff Giant and the solid Muldoon, what are some of the key takeaways? What can we learn from these hoaxes, these audacious attempts to deceive the public?
I think the most important lesson is to be critical consumers of information.
Right. Don't just blindly accept what you're told, even if it comes from a seemingly trustworthy source.
Do your own research.
Ask questions.
Seek evidence.
And remember that even the most outlandish stories can sometimes contain a grain of truth, or at least reveal something interesting about the people who create them and the culture that embraces them.
So the next time you encounter a headline that seems too good to be true, or a story that challenges your understanding of the world, remember the Cardiff Giant and the solid Muldoon. Be skeptical, be curious, and always be willing to dig a little deeper.
Because the truth, as elusive as it may sometimes seem, is always out there, waiting to be discovered.
And it's often stranger and more fascinating than any fiction we could dream up.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of hoaxes, humbuggery, and the enduring power of a good story. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop learning.